Our culture, for some of us, when we get sick in our culture, well, we want to go to a hospital that is properly sanitized, and oh my goodness, the more technology, the better. And then in other cultures, when they get sick, why, they go to a shaman who cooks up some herbs, they chant around a fire, sometimes they even pull energies off of people, and bam, they're better again. So I ask you, what's the difference between these two forms of healing? Nothing, just the person's belief in them. So I'd like to share my story about how I came to a rather abrupt awakening, where it was my time to question some of my beliefs. And we've all come to that place in life where we have to stop and look at our beliefs and notice what's working, what's not working. Not mentioning any names, but disease. May want to question that one. Yeah, I know, right? So, and because we all sense, all have this inner sense that we're capable of so much more, that we're possible of going out there and going far beyond the status quo or the beliefs of our culture, because we have that inner sense. And after all, we've seen other people out there doing it. And as inspiring as this might be sometimes to see other people do it, sometimes it can bring up a conflict in us. Because there's that part of us that so believes that anything's possible. And then there's that part of us that questions things and says, well, who am I to do this? Who am I to go after what I want? But then there's that other part that is like, no, it is possible. You can go beyond the status quo, and you can achieve what you want, and you can live a purposeful life. And God bless those around us because they're so well-meaning and intentioned, but they're also a victim of their beliefs that they were born in. So then we have that questioning voice along with them, who they don't mean to be unsupportive, but they're saying things like, you know, you shouldn't be a dreamer. You should go out and get a real job. 45 years, my dad said to me. Don't you think you should get a diploma? Don't you think you should go back to school? I think 45 years it took him to finally stop. Because in his consensus reality, you weren't anyone if you didn't have a diploma. And he was a victim of his beliefs. So as inspiring as it can be to see other people out there doing it, we have that conflict going back and forth inside. But yet sometimes we just have to put that aside and go after what we want. So I'd like to share the comfortable hole that I found in my shoe for the first few years of my career. You see, I didn't realize that I had some beliefs that were limiting me. And I had a rather abrupt awakening at a time, which I am actually forever thankful for, because it started to show me that I didn't know what I didn't know. Well, it's kind of like being an alcoholic. Until you admit that you're an alcoholic, you don't know what you don't know. And I had to admit to myself that even though I was a hypnotist, and I had to admit that, even though I was a hypnotist, I didn't believe in the power of the mind as much as I thought I did. So let me explain what happened. One day, I'm opening my emails, and I got an email from a friend of mine named Mike Mandel, and I'm very fortunate to have him in my life because he's one of the most renowned hypnotists in Canada. And all the email says is this: worked with a woman with asthma for 35 years on 2 inhalers. She doesn't need them anymore. And I thought to myself, what the heck is this guy doing to get those kind of results? I don't get those kind of results. Okay, granted, he had 35 years experience on me. That's fine. But I needed to know what he was doing, that he could work with a woman for probably 2 hours who had this disease for 35 years, and she was, healed enough that she didn't need her inhalers. So the first thing I did was call him up, and I was not shy about it because I had to know. And I wanted to pick his brain, so I decided I would take him to lunch. And then I thought, you know what? I've always wanted to start an inspirational podcast at the time, so why don't I interview him and let everybody benefit from this? So I set up the interview on the couch in my office. Mike comes in. And as I'm interviewing him, and he's sharing with me the miracles that he's seen in his career, I am absolutely mesmerized But it's also one of those times where I had to stop and say, okay, maybe I've been doing it all wrong all along. And as painful as that is, it's not a bad thing because you don't know what you don't know, right? So let me explain once again what I mean. So Mike also worked for the police periodically as a forensic hypnotist. They would call him in when he had to interview a witness to come up with more information under hypnosis than they could provide normally. So this particular case was a young girl who was robbed at a McDonald's drive-thru at gunpoint, and the police wanted to see if they could retrieve any extra information from her that would help them solve the crime. So the first thing Mike does is put her in hypnosis, and then as she's in hypnosis and the car pulls up to the drive-thru, the first thing he says is, okay, freeze frame it. So she does. And he says, what did they order? And she tells him their exact order. And then he says, how much did they pay? And she tells him once again the exact amount they paid. And I am listening to this, and I am thinking to myself, I didn't even know this was possible. I didn't know that we stored all this information in our brain. And then next, he says, he has the car pull up to the window again, and he says, okay, I want you to freeze frame it. Tell me what you see. At that point, the girl realizes there's actually two people in the vehicle, two men, and she goes on to describe those two men in detail. And of course, the police are taking notes frantically. And this is all good. And all the meanwhile, I'm saying to myself, oh my God, I can't believe this. So as the story goes on, the van, it was a van actually, the van begins to pull away. And once again, he says, freeze frame it. She does. He says, tell me the license plate number. And she says, I can't see it. It's too dark. He says, well, brighten it. So she does. Then he asks her again, what's the license plate number? It's too far. I still can't see it. Zoom in on it. At that point, she gives him the 6-digit license plate 6 months later after a robbery. And you know what? The police then found that vehicle abandoned on the border of Quebec. And she was correct on 5 out of the 6 license plate numbers. So again, that was another lesson to me to show me that I had to question where I was at. Now, it's not that Mike was creating miracles, although he was. That rather abrupt learning that had come to me was that I was the one who's actually stopping them. And we all know how it is when you realize something like that. There's a quote by Anais Nin that says, and the time came when the risk to stay in the bud was more painful than it took to blossom. So I had to admit to myself that I had to change my beliefs. So then what happened was I was hooked. I mean, this was incredible to me. I had to learn more because this power of the mind thing was just blowing me away. So what I did was, I went a little crazy, to be honest with you. I was going to a hypnosis convention, and I ended up overall interviewing 70 of the world's top hypnotists on the miracles they've seen, and the miracles were astounding. I mean, I'll just describe one because he was my very second interview. His name is Steve Remo out of Nashville. When I was there, I decided to have an interview with him. And he had a client that called him up in a panic because she had just been diagnosed with breast cancer. And rightfully so, because she had a small child. And he worked with her for 2 hours on a Thursday. And by Monday, when she went back to the doctor, the tumor was gone. All that was left was radial scarring. And the doctor was so fascinated that he drove the results up to the university himself. So this is a medically documented miracle. But needless to say, what did I learn from all this? The thing that I learned from all this is that we are only limited by our own beliefs and our imaginations. And these hypnotists, they would take everything they had and throw it at a problem. They were not worrying about what their client thought, what the consensus reality thought. They would just do it. So eventually, I had to give up that old pair of shoes and trade it in for new ones. And we all know what it's like when you get a new pair of shoes, right? Sometimes they fit like a glove, And sometimes it takes a little while to break them in. It can be a little painful, so we take those shoes off for a while we recover, and then we put them back on because to put on those old shoes is no longer an option. Thank you.